It is not only instinctive to take good care of someone that you love, but also to take good care of ourselves. Unfortunately, we often forget this loving instinct when it comes to us. And so, when we become adults and start to do things and look after ourselves, some of us find even the most basic things really tricky. We try and do all that we need to do, including all the things our parents used to do for us, in different ways, but often with varying levels of efficiency and without any sense of awareness. Self-parenting is a technique which helps us become aware of how we're treating ourselves and shows us how to take ownership of our own caretaking. We're immensely lucky to have Pujya Swamiji here with us today to share his wisdom and insights on this very important topic of self-parenting. Welcome, Pujya Swamiji.
Hari Om.
To start off with, there are a few definitions of self-parenting out there. Pujya Swamiji, could you please provide your perspective on what self-parenting means?
Self-parenting means that as we have grown up being nurtured by our parents, very often when we grow up, we realize that something was lacking or something that we expected we did not get. And whatever we are today is a product of our own past nature as well as the nurturing by the parents. Sometimes people feel that they've missed out, not necessarily always because of the parents, but life situations. In their nurturing, they have not got what they feel right now they should have got, or they find that there are certain repetitive patterns that they cannot get over, which when nurtured in the childhood would have helped. But parents are not always expert as much as they do their best. If you find that something was lacking, maybe parent giving a time to you in simple words, or things that you required during your childhood development, and you are not able to gain that, self-parenting is that not live in the dead moments of the past, not live regretting that you did not get during that stage of your life that parenting that you should have got, or even your parents were not available or were not able to parent you in such a way that you would grow up to be confident, to be cheerful, to be happy, to have the various talents and skills, the attitudes, the culture. Sometimes it may be lacking in our parenting. So therefore, if it has been lacking, are we to continue to live with that sense of want or that sense of being deprived? Can we do something about it? And at this age, sometimes we find that to make that transformation, that change is different, because that child that you were, and there's a child in you that still needs to be nurtured, which is probably holding on to some regrets or grievances in the past, or has not treasured, and therefore not acknowledged and developed according to what was given to them. And therefore, at that time in the parenting, where some gaps have taken place, can we, at this stage of our life, whatever age we may be, to be able to give ourselves that parenting by which that child in us that had not developed or was lacking can be nurtured. And we can see a difference in the mature adult that we would want to be.
So then, Pujya Swamiji, in our self-parenting, do we actually also speak to our parents, our actual parents, and involve them in the process, or is it a sort of siloed thing?
So, as I had mentioned, in this self-parenting, it is not about our parents having made a mistake, though they could have made a mistake, but it's not about the mistake that they did or anything that they deliberately deprived us of, not any of that grievances that we need to go and solve with our parents. There are some issues that one may need to interact with their parents, resolve it with their parents. That is also sometimes needed. But here in self-parenting, even if you began to become aware that there was something lacking in your upbringing, it could be because you were not receptive, it could be because your parents at that moment did not know how, even though being your best well-wishers and loving, or also that for life situations or for whatever other reasons, that child of you was not given that development, that security, that sense of being loved, or that sense of confidence, value systems, or you did not receive it for whatever reason. That is what we have to address in self-parenting. So I repeat again that there are some things that may have happened and we need to resolve with our parents and discuss with our parents. But self-parenting is not about now going as a child and telling your parent to undo or do for you what they could not do in your childhood. It's about undoing by ourselves, by parenting ourselves, and enriching ourselves by parenting ourselves. And how is that possible? Through some examples I will be explaining as we have various issues that we recognize that we required some parental guidance and we seem to still require it.
Great, thank you, Pujya Swamiji. That makes everything a lot clearer. So then, Pujya Swamiji, let's basically also touch upon this concept of the inner child that Pujya Swamiji mentioned. So like Pujya Swamiji said, it's often mentioned that we have this inner child, meaning that we have an adult voice and a child voice inside of us, where the adult voice is doing the parenting to the child within. I guess the question is, how do we separate our parent voice from our child voice?
I don't think so. We need to separate it because it's distinctly there when we recognize it. But at this moment, yes, there could be this feeling that we do not know. It's that child in us complaining, etc. But that's what's carried on from our childhood. About self-parenting is that just as you are now nurturing your children, and of course you may not be yet a parent, but what you expect from your parents, how is it that you who now understand or have become aware, and that also will tell you how to become aware, but now that you have become aware of that child in you that needs to develop. A lot of you has developed into an adult, but there's a child in you that still needs nurturing, that still needs to give up those memories that are holding them back. So, as you become more self-aware, you begin to first and foremost recognize that ungrown child in you. There's, of course, that innocence, that spirit of childhood that always remains in us. That's not what needs to be addressed. It is what we feel that we were not nurtured, deprived of, or what we see as repetitive patterns appearing in our life of things that we may have not liked in our parents, and they still seem to be repeating in our behavior. Can we transform those into those virtues, attitudes, behaviors that we would deem fit right now at our stage of our life?
Brilliant. I really like the notion of instead of separation, we need to bring in the awareness to make this happen. Thanks, Swamiji. So, Pujya Swamiji, there are times when our inner child just does not like or want to do the things that are beneficial and necessary for us. How do we parent our inner child in that situation so we can start doing these things?
Now, this is possible that during childhood, either we were stubborn, we were indiscriminative, or at that time insistent, and at that moment, to the best of their interest and their capability, the parent would not be able to either direct that child or regulate that child or transform that child's stubbornness into determination or to channelize that energy. In that case is where you have to bring in your self-parenting. So you will also face the same difficulties that maybe your parents faced when you were a child, and you will become more understanding for their inability at that time to maybe nurture you. Or it also could be that at that time they did not know how to nurture you, or in some extreme cases it could be that they were not aware, or there was some form of neglect, or they gave up on, say, a very stubborn or an aggressive child. It could happen that way. Now, you will find that if that's the case, where I'm taking first that the child may have been aggressive, and the parent, even trying, were not able to communicate to the child or to direct the child or transform the child into or channelize the child into better avenues. So you will start becoming aware that what problems your parents faced, first and foremost. Second, of course, you can realize where they were not able to perform. But the moment you recognize what difficulty they may have faced that you are facing right now, being a parent to yourself, if you recognize that, first and foremost, you will have that empathy, that sympathy of what our parents may have faced at that time. Even if you realize that you yourself have neglected this, even though you were aware, but you've delayed it, etc., then even if they did it, even if at that period of time they would have not been there at that stage of your development for you, or did not know how to do it, or maybe even and we must not deny the fact, but not hold it against them, that at certain periods of time they could have been, with the best of their love and interest, wrong. You will begin to understand, sympathize, and identify with your parents in that case. And now, as a parent, what you need to do for that child in you, as you would want your parents at that time to know, to be concerned, to give their priority to this aspect of your, development in your childhood, you start doing that for that inner child. You be the parent that was required at that time, at that period. Don't rush to your parents and tell them, now do it, because you have grown into a different age group. Their capacity and your receptivity will be very different. But in your inner parenting, as your parent, or what you would want from your parents, or what was at that moment lacking in your parenting, you can now substitute that to this inner child.
Thank you so much, Pujya Swamiji. That was a really beautiful explanation, and something that I've never sort of come across before. So bringing in the compassion, empathy element towards your parents versus blaming them. Thank you so much. So then, Pujya Swamiji, I guess the next natural question would be, how do we do this disciplining of our inner child? It sometimes just seems so hard, and, a lot of us struggle with it. From even the most basic things like, getting up or exercising or looking after our sort of health, yet alone the more complex matter of our lives.
Now, very interesting in this question is that at this moment, as an adult, you are not disciplined. So just as the best way of parenting is to demonstrate and do things along with the child, at this moment, do not blame your indiscipline to your childhood. What I mean to say is, yes, at that moment, maybe you may have not been disciplined, and discipline here does not mean any harsh discipline, but regulating your timings and activities and creating positive habits that parents should, during their nurturing, bring about in the children, the right values, etc. But at this moment, when you do not have this kind of discipline of waking up in the morning, because maybe in the childhood you have not done it, but same thing you realize as parents, that even if you are not able, as a parent, when you are not able to do the right thing, you still want your children to do the right thing, because you know what consequences you are suffering because of that indiscipline in your life, or even say a habit or an addiction in your life. So just as in parenting, out of your love and concern for your children, two things that you do: prevent them from the wrong that you have allowed within yourself, and second is that you try to parent them not so much through just teaching and lecturing, but by demonstrating to them. So there is where you have to identify with the parent in you and start demonstrating as a parent for that child in you the right discipline. Because there is where you don't tell the child that, oh, you better discipline yourself. No. There is where you actually, if you're still struggling at this moment of your life with discipline, You can try to become aware where in your childhood that indiscipline either took place or was encouraged. Very often it is not necessarily during our childhood, but as we grow up into our teenage, and even that needs to be parent, where we go through the various changes, we have a sense of independence which can get into an attitude of defiance and revolt. We are affected by our peers. So it's not about parenting, because as we have seen in the sessions of parenting for teenagers, that the parent also has to evolve with the teenager. So here, again, to just introduce that things could have happened at different stages of your life. So different type of parenting is required. If it has happened at the stage of, say, in your life as a teenager, and at that moment either you did not allow your parents, or your parents could not at that time cope or deal with the teenager that was growing up, going through the changes, going through the confusion, going through the turmoils, and maybe not being able to handle that properly. That is the time you have to address yourself. So two things which I was trying to point out here is that first of all, there as a parent you discipline yourself. So it's not necessarily going back to the past. Don't give it an excuse to the past. In the present you discipline yourself. But certain very strong behavioral traits or grievances or certain repetitive patterns in your life which are coming up, and you want to address it, but you're not addressing it. Now, as far as discipline is concerned, there is something that you might have to discipline in the child, and of course you have to become more aware. But what is important is that this adult that you are, this parent that you are, needs to discipline himself or herself. And here, just as parents for their children make that tremendous change in themselves out of love, out of concern for the child, this is where you have to tap into your parenthood. That let me now demonstrate to the child in me what is right discipline. So work on yourself in the present. What is very difficult to work in the present, and you become aware it is due to some childhood deficiency in your upbringing. Not always parents, right? But some childhood deficiency in your upbringing, or some childhood impressions during your upbringing. Those are what we need to address in self-parenting.
Wow, Pujya Swamiji, that really takes self-love, or this idea of self-love, to a whole different level, where we need to really love the child within us to make any sort of significant change.
Yes, very much. Because whenever parents nurture a child, it is out of their love only that they are able to make that change or give them a positive direction. It requires a lot of love, and with love comes understanding, with love comes compassion, with love comes the clarity of what we need to do for the well-being of the child.
That was really thought-provoking, Pujya Swamiji. Thank you so much. I guess even more so because a lot of us find it very difficult to love ourselves. So it leads me into the next question, which is, so some people are really great at taking care of others, but not so good at doing the same with themselves. A very simple example being someone living alone, not bothering to cook healthy meals for themselves, or eating straight out of serving dishes to avoid any extra washing up. How do we then really inspire ourselves to take more care of us, both at a physical and a mental level?
Here also, there are two things. One is that people themselves are lazy, yeah? And therefore they don't want to do things for themselves. See, love for the self is very natural, but sometimes out of laziness we don't do some things for ourselves. But we find this in our parents, that very often they would neglect their own food, their timings, their health also for their children. This is very often seen in parents, and particularly as far as food and all this is concerned, in the ever-giving mother. So we find that happens, and we've all seen that in our parents, that they would sometimes deprive themselves to give to their children. Now, when there is a need for that, it is very natural for a parent to do it. It is the glory of parenthood. And they do it out of their love without feeling a sense of deprivation, etc. Not that it's forced upon them. And that nurtures them. And therefore, they can continue to do it without really negatively affecting themselves, including nurturing the child during illness. You will find the parent do not that easily get ill. Also, you will find that even as far as food, whoever is the one who is cooking in the house generally enjoys feeding so much that looks like they're neglecting, but pretty much, they're putting on weight. And I don't mean in a negative way, but as you say, they look very nurtured. So when out of love, you are doing things, then there are parents, and for self-parenting, it's very important to understand that also. When they are overly attached to the child, which means they become obsessive, possessive, they become anxious, there, in that preoccupation of the child, that they start neglecting themselves and even do things where they psychologically, physically harm themselves. That is where we have to be very careful whether you're parenting a child of your own or as a teacher, etc., nurturing children, as well as when you are nurturing yourself. If you get over anxious, too attached, there is where all this form of neglect, and you're not helping the child. This is where also, again, when you go into self-parenting, your parents, out of their love, but then due to their anxiousness and their attachments, when they started becoming, in a way, possessive, in some cases obsessive also about their children's welfare, they seem to have even neglected themselves, because the principle behind here is you love someone in whom you see yourself. And love for the self is natural. But when, again, that self is placed only in the child to fulfill your needs, your desires, and your ambitions from the child, this is called as attachment. And when that attachment takes place, that person, and you find that also in extreme cases when couples fall in love with each other, and there's extreme case of infatuation and attachment that people even harm themselves to get the affection, attention from the other, which even children do it, and sometimes even parents can, maybe in few cases, in a way suffer or torture themselves to make the child or the spouse regretful or to get their attention. Now, these are the things where in childhood, if you have seen your parents doing it, or during the upbringing, somewhere you have started doing this to yourself to get attention. And at that time, your parents were not able to deal with this need of attention and attention seeking. It can come from both ways. One, from the child himself or herself, and the other way is the parents who are attention seeking have somehow filtered it into the child, or condensed it into the child. Whatever may be the case there is where at this moment, as a parent, you bring again all your love, your care, and where you do not understand, now as an adult you can understand, you try to understand, you see the importance of nurturing that child who is yourself only. Now, parents see it, their child as their self. Here, you're seeing yourself as yourself. And therefore, nurturing that child in you now as a parent, where you felt that either you were not understood or your parents did not know or had means to understand you, there is where you get back to that child and start making that child recognize what is love. Love is not attachment. In attachment, you are thinking more about yourself than of the other. In love, just as if a doctor has to cure the illness or even an epidemic, the doctor has to take care of himself so that he can serve better. Therefore, subconsciously, every parent knows, and therefore sometimes they are anxious about their own well-being, because if anything happens to them, what will happen to the child? No. So, bring your focus to your love for the child, not the attachment. No? So even as parents, you may sacrifice a lot of things, but neglect of yourself is not a sacrifice. Harming yourself is not a sacrifice, because if you are not healthy, you are not nurtured, you are not fit, and you feel also unnurtured, undernutritioned, or deprived, you cannot give to the child the best. And also, linking it with the previous question and answer that you asked, that if at this moment you neglect yourself, like being dirty or unwashed or not eating on time, then what are you going to demonstrate to the child in you? So therefore, with that love, you can nurture the parent in you. So both need to be nurtured. That as a parent, I have to demonstrate to the child. Now, again, this parent, as a parent, there's a lot more change we can do to ourselves for our child. So it becomes, this technique of self-parenting becomes a dual method of developing yourself. One, as a parent, what you would have wanted your parents to be, and now with your better understanding, you are developing yourself as a parent, and therefore in the present you're developing yourself. And what is lacking in that child, which is still not developing in you as a parent because of some holding on during that childhood, which was probably essential to develop that. For example, physically, to understand that certain bone density, certain nutrition we can grab only at childhood, which probably goes with us for life. And if we are deprived in the childhood, that growth stage, say a lack of certain proteins, etc., then to substitute it later on and take a supplement might not be that easy. And therefore, a lot of intervention is required through, supplements, etc. But still, that portion in you which has not grown, that requires parenting, those are the issues that we have to address. But that self-neglect, whether of parents towards their children, or at this moment that you are neglecting yourself, it is because of some attachment to somebody or something, or it is sheer laziness, or there is not that motivation to develop yourself. So both ways you're benefited, as a parent and as a child. And in parenting also, where a parent nurtures the child, the parent for the child develops himself or herself, and in the process helps the child to develop. So this is the same understanding of parent-child relationship that you must have with yourself. And your self-neglect can be out of your sheer laziness, not being motivated, and therefore tap into that parent who would like to be a shining example, an ideal for that child. And a lot of our parenting is that we demonstrate to the child, and the child, when begins to admire the parent or has got confidence and recognizes the love and care of the parent, same way your inner parent, when begins to become aware, learn, and develop oneself to be a good parent for the child itself. And mind you, here there are not two, just also in parent and child. They are interlinked. Here they are one. So the moment you put an effort and get motivated to bring the parent to be an ideal, the child looks up, feels that I have got a parent to look up. Even today, sometimes we have heard children and youngsters saying that we don't have a role model. Today, we don't even consider our parents to be role models. So, you become the role model, and that motivation to be a role model parent also drives you to make that change so that the inner child gets inspired and identifies with the adult that you are right now, or say becomes that adult or wants to become the adult. So in both parenting with a child or parenting the child in you, these are essentials in parenting. So yes, very good question, but understand that neglecting is due to our attachment, not due to our love. So bring love into your parenting. And even a parent's well-being is so important for the children, Because children actually look out for the well-being of their parents because they know that their well-being is dependent on the parent. So if the parent is confident, if the parent has got a self, is well-being, or the parent is healthy, or the parent is knowledgeable, understanding, confident, protective, and the child has the confidence in that parents, not only the child develops confidently, but the child feels secure and the child feels inspired to imitate the parent. So therefore you see, it's a very, wonderful dual development methodology, that the parent motivates himself or herself to grow, and in the process helps the child, and the child admires the parent and begins to grow. And children admire even the attempt, just as parents admire the attempt of the child and would like to reward the child for their attempt, not necessarily their final success. Same way children also. They may not be at that moment that mature and sometimes feel that they lacked on it, but they do appreciate that the parents are trying. Same way, in inner parenting, this kind of synergy begins to happen, where the gap between the adult you wanted to be and the parent that want to nurture the child to be what you want to be right now, that synergy takes place and the whole process then becomes very quick. This, when we start practicing, we will begin to see it.
Thank you so much, Pujya Swamiji. Your answer keeps illustrating the importance and how crucial it is for us to understand the difference between acceptance, attachment, real love. Really love this idea of dual interlinking transformation within us. Exciting.
Yes, because remember, love is identification with the beloved. And if anything harmful happens to me and it is going to affect my beloved harmfully, I cannot afford that. That is love.
University is where you become yourself. This is the age where you discover what you are, who you would become. And Chinmaya Mission, I believe, helps you in that journey. It gives you a holistic education. It exposes you to the world. It is very cosmopolitan in nature. Your worldview expands, your perspectives change. You become a better person, I feel. That, I think, is what we offer. I'm Neetu S. Kumar. I teach English at this university. There are these seminars we conduct on a weekly basis where people from outside come and talk about various things. One of the topics was IKT and bioinformatics. I mean, these are two words. I never thought I would hear them in one sentence. It's all about taking what we already know. We don't have to start with a blank slate. It's all about constructivist methodology. You don't come with a blank slate to the classroom. What do you bring? What do we bring? And how can we put it together to make something totally new?
At Chinmaya Vishwavidyapith, we are creating a new arena for the mind. Join us in nurturing young leaders with open minds, open hearts, and a bigger purpose. One knowledge, one world. Integrating Indian wisdom with contemporary knowledge. To donate or to find out more, visit our website